Welcome to Confessions of an Early Career Researcher, the show where we deep dive into the journeys, challenges and successes of ECRs. Whether you're just navigating the early stages of your career or you're a more seasoned ECR, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we speak with ECRs at varying stages of their careers to discuss their experiences and unpack their academia survival tips. I'm your host, Leonie Smith, a philosopher and lecturer at Lancaster University. And today's episode is all about academic research grants and applying for them. So welcome to the podcast, Anna and Pavan. I thought it would be great to just start by asking you to introduce yourselves and your interest in the grants process and potentially a bit about your experience. Pavan first, maybe.
Well, I'm Dr. Pavan Mano. I'm lecturer in global cultures at King's College London. I'm a cultural theorist. I work mainly in the humanities. I'm interested in nationalism and all of its sort of exclusions. My first book has just been published with Manchester Uni Press. With grants and funding, I think I'm interested in how it can support the work that I do, first and foremost, really, both in terms of the resources by way of money, but also in terms of time, protecting time to dedicate to research.
Absolutely. A very common concern, I think, that will be for many people listening. Anna?
Yes, I'm Anna Vignoles. I'm actually an economist by background, but most of my career was spent working on the economics of education, looking at particularly inequalities in education outcomes. I've worked at the London School of Economics, UCL and Cambridge. But in 2021, I took up the directorship of the Leverhulme Trust. And the Leverhulme Trust, as many of you will know, tries to make your time available by giving you research grants. That's the aim anyway. And my interest is obviously to make sure that we fund exciting people to do exciting things in as equitable way as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you both for that quick intro. And Anna, did you say as well when we spoke before that you were a mature student when you came back to...
That's right. So I did an undergraduate degree in economics and then went to work. I won't call it the outside world, but you know what I mean, outside academia. So I worked in HR actually, which was very interesting. It illuminated a lot for me. And particularly I worked in a factory in South Shields recruiting people and realised very quickly that there was a massive problem with skills. And actually it was that led me to want to study it more. And I went back and did a PhD, essentially in labour markets, but then specialised in education through my life. And yes, and I think there are many advantages for being a mature student, some disadvantages. You're living on a PhD stipend when you're older, but it was a good experience.
Yeah, I can empathise. I was also a mature student, and we've got an episode coming up in the series for anyone who's listening on what is an ECR, and so it's great to hear the kind of variety already of different people's experiences. So thinking about academic grants, it's something that a lot of people who are listening will be very sort of aware of the need to get grants and so on. What has been your experience so far of applying for any kinds of grants, Pavan? Have you applied for grants? Have you been successful? Have you had feedback?
So I think it's been a mix of internal grants, so internal to the institution that I'm working in, and then external grants, so places like the British Academy, Leverhulme Trust. I think there is a question of scale when it comes to what kind of grant you're applying for. And at this stage of my career and the sort of projects I'm working on, it's mainly been small and medium grants. So kind of from, £1,000 to £10,000-15,000. There are much bigger grants that I know colleagues work on. We're talking sort of 100,000 and above, 400,000 above. We're thinking about hiring a PhD student, that kind of scale, right? So I think one of the things I've been grappling with is getting to grips with what is appropriate to the project I'm working on, who I'm working with, who I want to potentially rope in and work with, and then the sort of resources that I need to be able to do that. I think up till now, the big project that I've had to resource has been my book project. And that's in the humanities, I think it tends to be single authored project, right?
Yeah.
So I've been looking for grants. I spent a lot of time looking for funding pathways that free up my time. So before I got my job at King's, I was really competing for postdoctoral fellowships, and I managed to get a fellowship at UCL, the Sarah Parker Riemann Center, which gave me a year of protected time to work on my book,
which is amazing.
It was terrific. That's it's gold dust, I think, in this current climate. To be able to just work on your book, and that was really, really useful in being able to put together a proposal, a completed manuscript, and then subsequently with things like publication subventions and stuff, proofreading, that kind of stuff, I needed small pots of funding to get that over the line. Now, once that was out of the way at King's, I started to think a little bit about teaching and pedagogy. And for that, I worked with a colleague and we developed a kind of grant proposal thinking about an internal project that was appropriate to the strategic aims of the university, online teaching. We put together a project to think about what that might mean pedagogically, bid for some money, really to hire a research assistant to do some of the legwork for us that we could not do, right, because of teaching and admin. Yeah. So I think those are sort of the various types of grants and funding.
Quite a wide range, even just thinking about that.
Even
yeah. So, because I think when people think about research grants, so some of the obvious ones I immediately think of are the British Academy Early Career Fellowship Grant, the Leverhulme Early Career Grant, and I had a Leverhulme scheme myself. But I think one of the things you've started to highlight there is that in the current landscape, actually, you might do a postdoc or you might have a year where you get funding. But even as you continue through your career, applying for research grants is kind of a big part of that. Is that fair to say? It sort of continues.
Yeah. I mean, and also I think that the other kind of, the reality is that there are lots more of us than there are grants and fellowships. And almost, I'm not sure the exact percentage, but I think it's safe to say that by definition, it's quite reasonable to assume that, if you apply for something, that it's far more likely that you don't get it than you do get it, right? So there is an element of, I think, just sticking at it and applying, which can kind of grind you down to a certain extent. But yeah, I think that is worth just highlighting. It's not a failure.
It's worth highlighting. I think I'd like to come back to that actually in a bit. The sort of percentages and how do you keep going through all this kind of stuff. And then we sort of touched on various different grants there. You've obviously got lots of experience of applications that come through for some of these postdoc style fellowships for early career researchers and others. What would you say, if you have you seen any changes over sort of the last decade or so in terms of what's coming through, the type of things people are applying for, anything at all that's different?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we can safely say there's been a step change in the sort of quality of applications over time.
Running upwards?
Oh, definitely upwards.
Right.
Definitely upwards. I think back to when I was, starting in my career as a sort of postdoc, and the level of competition and what you were expected to have achieved by the time you got your first, postdoc position. It's very different from today. I mean, I'm stunned by the quality of the applications we get. I think there's another aspect to it, though, and you touched on this, Pavan, is that small grants can be incredibly useful, and different disciplines have different grant needs. And certainly at the Leverhulme Trust, we're very conscious of that, because what does that look like? It looks like, much bigger projects sometimes in STEM, because you've got a PhD and a postdoc on that project. And you're all working together. It might look like a fellowship, because once you're into a job, you need the time. But also it might just look like a small grant, because that's what you need to get some work done, or to finish a book, or whatever it is that you need. So one thing I would say is you're absolutely right to say that applying for grants is going to become routine and part of your norm if you're an academic, but also thinking quite hard about who you're applying for and why. Because, if you've got the right grant for your project, you're much more likely to succeed.
Okay.
Though, of course, it is absolutely true. You're, on average, less likely to succeed than succeed, sadly, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that thing you said there about applying for the right kind of grant. So it is a fact of the job situation right now. This is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be applying for grants. Of course, you're not going to get all the things that you apply for because of the percentages. But presumably the best way to maximise your chances of being successful is to be thinking about who you're applying to. What is it you're applying for? What advice would you give people who are trying to put together a proposal to get some funding?
I think that's actually where you start. You have to think about both the intentions of the funder and the particular call that you're applying to. There's no point in trying to crowbar your brilliant project, which might well be brilliant, that doesn't actually fit with what the funder's trying to do. So if you take us just as an example, we're doing fundamental research, we're doing blue skies, right? We're doing risky, that kind of research. So if this is a follow-on project for something you've been working on for a decade on, this is not necessarily going to be the right funder. Right? If you're applying to UKRI, a lot of their work, they really like to see the potential impact. If you're doing a project that you just are really excited about the potential for that impact down the line, you might want to be looking at a different funder. So I think the first stage is to align your project with what the funder's after. Of course, that's the first step. The second step is to write a really clear, intelligible application. And even there, you go back to what does the funder do to assess the application? If it's all peer reviewed like our stuff, well, think about it. You're writing for other academics who are going to read the application, and you should write with their sort of inclinations in mind. And I don't know about you, but as academics, we always tend to dive straight into the methods, and and we don't like overselling. We don't like being overly ambitious when it's not actually going to deliver. Most academics don't like that. So you're writing for your fellow academics. So just have a think about that when you're actually putting pen to paper. Typewriter.
So it is really important, and it might sound obvious, but I think it is worth stressing. It's really important to look at who is this funder, what is it they actually want to fund, and is that actually what you're trying to get funded. You've obviously had success, Pavan, with sort of these smaller pots for things very specific. You said a teaching grant, something else. So it sounds like you've kind of gone through that process of trying to find the right sort of pot of money for what you were after, would you say? Or were you just flinging it out there, trying for everything? What was the process?
I think a bit of both, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there is the element of it being a sort of numbers game, but I think you do need to. What's the thing? You got to buy a ticket to win the lottery, isn't it? So I think you do need to. As Anna said, put together the application for the right funder and kind of hit the various things that funders ask for. I think it sometimes helps to be quite blunt about this in the sense of looking at the guidelines that exist and using the same language that exists in these guidelines and just sort of almost writing something that is in parallel to it, or at least showing how one's project matches up to these bits of criteria. That's
useful, actually, because I think, as you mentioned, Anna, the whole, we might shy away from selling ourselves or shy away from doing this kind of thing. And it might feel a little bit artificial to be sort of pointing out exactly how you do meet the requirements. Would you say it is a good idea to just be that explicit and to make sure you're making it very clear, yes, I do have an interdisciplinary project, for example, or whatever it is?
Absolutely. And I mean, most funders have things that they really, really care about. Some funders, you're absolutely right, Pavan, the best thing is simply to go through the criteria and say, this is how I hit it. If you're looking at a funder like us, we want a really good idea, but we also have a box on our forms that says, could you explain why the trust should fund this? Because we're, a big but nonetheless a small player in the research funding field. Why should we fund this as opposed to another project? That's a serious question.
Yeah.
And it's not about, well, it's brilliant. Well, obviously it's brilliant, but why us and why not someone else?
Yeah.
And just taking the time to think about that, and in our case at least, being quite transparent in what you're trying to get at, what you're trying to achieve. why you think it's, come to the Leverhulme. Actually, we respond really well to that. Much more than we do to having sort of, stock answers, shall we say.
Okay, so it is about, so not necessarily the buzzwords or the stock answers or something. And is it fair to say as well, so we talked about one side of it might be you don't want to over-egg what you're doing, but the other side might be you think, oh, well, I should try and cram in that this is, I'm thinking interdisciplinary because that word comes up a lot now, or it's definitely this because you've seen it there, but presumably that really stands out if then the content doesn't match up to that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of points. I mean, I'd really like to make a point, if I may, about interdisciplinarity. Getting interdisciplinary research funded is tricky. And I speak as someone who tried for many years and had many rejections along the way. And that's because you can end up with not really pleasing all of the disciplines, and then you send it out to peer review, and all the peer reviewers have a niggle or a problem, and it ends up not feeling like a fantastic proposal, even though actually it's exactly what's needed in that space. So I think with interdisciplinarity, pick your funder carefully, be explicit that it's interdisciplinary, signal, the balance. So you might have a bit of economics, but, economics is not the core, and be really clear, because that will help the funder figure out which reviewers would be appropriate. And certainly in our case, if we get an interdisciplinary proposal that 6 reviewers absolutely love and the economist doesn't, we can ignore and do ignore some reviews, not because they're not, spot on in some respects, but because they've missed the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That interdisciplinary piece is really important.
That's really helpful, actually, because I think maybe it's a slight divergence from where we were talking, but this interdisciplinarity is one of the things that increasingly people talk about in funding. So having some insight into what to do with that is really useful. And so we've talked about there's different scales of things. It sounds like in terms of applying, then have a really great project, because the quality across the board wherever you're applying is likely to be very high. Now, presumably, get at least one other person to read it before you submit. Then look at what the funding body is actually all about and make sure that you're sort of hitting what it is that they're interested in, and then be really clear about how exactly you meet those requirements. Is that fair to say? We're sort of in agreement that these are key.
Yes, the only thing I'd add to that is I'm going to give a plug for the research offices around the country.
Okay, yes.
I would say ideally more than one person should read the proposal, certainly if it's a significant proposal, certainly if it's for a fellowship that's going to affect the next 3 years of your life. Yes, get other academics to read it, but often the research office will have a very good idea of the criteria that particular funder is interested in. And generally, when you write something and it makes perfect sense to you, and it makes perfect sense to many people who are working in that very, very specific bit of the field, but the moment it goes outside that, it doesn't. And it's that sort of sense check that you want that will massively improve a proposal without changing the content necessarily, but just in how it's expressed. So
showing you all the things that you take for granted. That actually resonates with me. I remember when I was applying for my Leverhulme fellowship, actually, I'm a British Academy fellowship, I was using the word epistemology without thinking that this might not be the opening you want to go with. Maybe people don't all know what that is. It's something that philosophers often get tangled up in. So
I think that's a really crucial point. The research offices in most universities, they're fantastic. And one of the things that ECRs, I think, have a problem with is who do you send it to? Like, you need people to be able to send to ask, right? To ask for that help. And I think early on in your career, it is absolutely normal to have a relatively small network. So you don't have that many people to send it to, don't have that many people who are senior to you to send it to. So good options, I think, would be Viva examiners, for example. Good first port of call to get some opinions. But the research offices can do a really good job of getting someone else who's more senior and also appropriate to the project to give some opinion on it. But I think this is also just a useful segue to just flag that, the stuff around selling the project and highlighting how good it is. I think there is an element of, racialization and gender where certain groups of people are less likely to boast about how good the project is, right? And other groups of people, I think, are more likely to be quite comfortable with saying this is the best project that's existed since sliced bread or something. Like, there are people who are really good at making that case and others who are taught to be a bit more humble about it, often to one's own detriment. And I think that's worth acknowledging. It's something to unlearn as well, I think, when it comes to certain genres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. I've seen that in the kind of research. And one of the things that I think can help with that is, yes, having experts like the research officers look at this, but also recognizing it's not about bragging. It's about saying it will precisely do these things, and then having somebody else talk through with you what would be the impact of that then. What does that mean, maybe? Anna, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I mean, it's almost the flip side of what I was saying earlier about academics instinctively often don't like that overselling. But I think that's possibly because a lot of us have been thinking long and hard about how to strip out applications of the fluff and the sell to try and get to the heart of it, precisely because of what you say, because it's a more equitable way of doing it, because you actually want to focus on the content. But what you're saying, Pavan, about people putting themselves forward is absolutely right. And one of the pieces of evidence for this is the British Academy has a small grant scheme, as you probably know by now on the podcast, and we fund it or partly fund it. And they've trialled that as a randomized control trial. So in other words, you put your application in. If it meets a certain threshold, then the actual final decision is made on the basis of a randomized control trial. And it's really interesting what the effect of that has been in the first instance. Now, it's not been fully evaluated, and that's coming later. But in the first instance, you've seen a big increase in the applications from groups that are generally underrepresented in academia. And I think that's the evidence for people being less willing to put themselves forward, underestimating their quality and the strength of their research.
That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Goodness. Okay, that's really interesting. So it's early days. We know that from the randomised trial approach, but it's showing an increase in percentages then of people from marginalised groups.
So, and we'll have to wait, until it's fully evaluated to see the ultimate effect of it. But what you can say, even at this stage, quite clearly, is that if you tell people that they have essentially as good a chance as any, people are more likely to put themselves forward, and I think that's quite revealing.
It's applying, and then you'll get the percentage that comes out the other side.
I think it's been running for a couple of years now, isn't it? Yeah. So it's I think whatever preliminary findings, and I was at the ECR network held an event recently about the small grant scheme, and the British Academy representative was talking about it. There's good reason to extend the trial that's been running, because it has delivered, as Ada said, really good results.
It's really interesting to hear about that, because I think maybe a lot of people who are listening might be sort of concerned about the idea that it's a random process or something like that. But actually, there could be real significant benefits to this.
There's an important point in that. So we receive, as the trust I'm speaking about, we receive far more top quality applications than we can fund.
Yes.
So the notion that it's not, to some extent, a little bit of luck in there isn't right. I mean, we do our best, and we obviously do extensive peer review. But, when faced with an array of projects, all of which could potentially be fundable with a limited budget, if you are the marginal one that falls off that list, that's getting close to saying you were just unlucky on the day.
Yeah.
And I think normalising both the fact that, the success rate, or we try and keep the success rate at about 1 in 5, which means 4 out of 5 will receive a rejection. So that's the starting point. But also to recognise that many, many of the ones that are receiving a rejection are very good ideas that in a different call or a different day might be funded. So don't give up. Think about alternative ways of pursuing the research.
So I think just to say that the BA does call it a partial randomized allocation, which is that all of these projects are evaluated. They're all peer reviewed, as far as I understand. They're all classified as fundable.
Threshold.
They're all fundable, and then they sort of randomly allocated to the amount of money that they have. Right? So it isn't a case that they're just throwing into the wind.
No,
right, isn't it?
Highlighting, absolutely. Everything meets the threshold first, and then there's a sort of process. I think this kind of leads to the thing I wanted to come back to, this kind of dealing with the rejection side of it, because what you've just said there, Anna, as well, is I think really critical, because one of the things when you apply for funding is sometimes you can't get a great deal of feedback on the application. So we know if you apply to one of the bigger schemes, there's a lot of applications, and it will often say we can't give you more feedback. But if you, for example, get told you made it to a shortlist or something like that, that could be a really good indicator that actually there's nothing wrong with your proposal. Just keep trying. Is that fair to say? Or
yes, I think the thing about rejection is also it is so central to academic life.
Yes.
I mean, journal rejections, grant rejections, these are normal. And they're not about you, or at least that's how I stayed sane during the period where I got a lot of rejections. It's about your proposal on the day or your journal article for that particular journal. It's not about a rejection of you. But of course, that's really easy to say and really hard when you're right in the middle of it to actually feel. And I think that's one of the areas where having networks and being able to talk to each other and just be honest about how it feels when you get a rejection, because it's almost as though you don't want to admit that it can be hurtful.
Feels a bit horrid, yeah.
But if you're all having them, everyone gets back up and you carry on, and that's kind of the way it works.
Really important point you said there, that it's not rejection of you, and I think this is where grants everything that we go through. It's not rejection of you. It's weren't successful with this application for this particular piece of work or research grant proposal, whatever it is. And we do have another episode coming up on networks as well. So we'll talk a bit more about the value of that in helping to make you resilient against this. Pavan, have you ever not been successful in
loads more than I?
Are you a rare exception?
No, absolutely. I think that the networks thing is a really important point. One of the things I found when I started from masters and then into PhD and subsequently, I think it's really important to find your people in wherever you're working. I work in cultural studies, and it's a weird discipline because it doesn't really exist as a discipline anymore. Like it's kind of disappeared. But the people have kind of sought refuge in.
People are still real.
Yeah, people are still real. They still exist. Well, they sought refuge in a literature department mostly. Sometimes sociology. But intellectually I've had to sort of do a bit of work to find these people in the literature department, because I don't really work with kind of Shakespeare and stuff. So I've had to do that. But I think also socially, it is important to find your people and, who you can go to and say that, it feels really, really bad. And I haven't got, the 3 things I applied for this term, I didn't get a single one of them. However, I also think it's really practically really important to have friends outside of academia, like outside of university.
What a wild notion.
Because it's really easy. It's really easy to get swept up in this, the idea that everything that happens at work is all important. And that the only thing that matters is, whether you're successful in a funding application or whether a journal accepts your work and stuff. I think a little bit of distance is quite useful, and it's quite hard to do as an early career researcher because you often have to work a lot more, to whether to get a fixed term contract or a permanent job. You're doing a lot more. You're working a lengthy period of time.
I think that's right. And so we'll come back to that in our other podcast episode.
I'm sure.
On these things, but it's really great to hear that this is actually part of this kind of strategy for dealing with failure. Yeah. Just full stop is other human beings can be helpful here. This is worth saying. When you've been unsuccessful in any particular experience, like what have you done with that proposal that's been rejected? Did you throw it in the bin? Did you try somewhere else? Can you remember?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I mentioned earlier, one of the projects I've got going on now is a teaching education project, pedagogic project. And it's funded by something at King's called the College Teaching Fund. This is something we only got funded on the third time of, third try, right? So it failed twice. And I, together with my colleague, I think we just sort of resubmitted it. I don't even know if we edited it very much.
Okay.
I think we resubmitted it as it maybe with a couple of tweaks, but very little extra work.
Speaks to what Anna was
saying.
Yeah.
I don't think there was. Yeah, it was a good proposal that it just didn't work in a certain pot of money that was available. It was kind of annoying. I think we were kind of annoyed. Didn't get it.
So maybe that's a healthier response than being sad. Just be a bit annoyed and just throw it somewhere else. Well, but the people reviewing these things are academics. We've all been in the various stages of acceptance, rejection, reviewing other people's things. So remembering that.
I'm smiling because I had lots of rejections in my life over grants and papers and goodness knows what, but two major grant rejections that sort of stand out in my mind. And that's because, of course, it was sort of 8 months of work putting together a big multi-million-pound application. And yes, my conclusion was they were wrong. So that,
categorically.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other thing is that when you're, getting rejections and it's you feel a bit alone because it's your proposal and you will. As you go on and you then start writing other people into your grants, it feels different and you feel more responsibility for other people. So that not getting a grant can feel really quite upsetting, to say the least. But ultimately, it's the same practice of just saying, it wasn't the right time and the right day and trying to move on to that.
So ultimately, the rejection is not of you. If there is any feedback, obviously, presumably we should look at it and consider it. Quite often there isn't. The proposal might be good. Keep going. And actually, it's interesting you spoke about involving other people. You can feel that kind of guilt or responsibility, I think, if you've got other people involved. But equally, maybe there's a part, and I'm thinking about your teaching application, things I've done, where having someone else involved means that you have got someone else to go, it's just daft, isn't it? So maybe there's swings and roundabouts to doing these kind of cross.
But also with feedback, I think it's worth being a little skeptical about how much of the feedback you take on board. There's definitely
judgment.
Yeah, I think so, because it's useful to have a different perspective, but I think it's also fine to be like, I think everything works in this project. There's not really anything I particularly want to tweak, and you put it up again. I mean, one has to be judicious with these things, but also I don't think we should turn the reviewer into a sacred figure.
And there's presumably there's a sense in which you might develop that judgment over time to sort of sense whether that is something I want to change, or maybe I just didn't go to the right people.
No, but it raises the question about reviewers, and certainly we've worked quite hard to think about, how do you get a broader set of people, more diverse, but from different angles, different perspectives. But ultimately, you are asking people in the field who know quite a bit about the field or the method or something to make a judgment. And you're right, they won't always be right in your view. And I'm sure also some of the more sort of risky, out there kind of research is more likely to get rejected by a field. And it's a really hard line, especially when you're starting in your career, to work out whether or not, am I being completely innovative here? Or is it, actually that I've got it slightly wrong? And going back to conversation about interdisciplinary, I think a lot of research that is applying some, innovative method or innovative thinking to a field in a new way, and particularly if it's sort of coming from another disciplinary perspective, that's where you really get, what, actually this idea is sound. The reviewer just didn't like it because it's not the way it's been done, and you move on and try and figure out other ways.
So consider who's reviewing this and what kind of feedback this is, what direction it's coming from as well. That's helpful as well. Okay, so we've got application out there. We've got the kind of what happens when you're rejected. Don't take it personally. Keep going, keep trying, because it is something we're going to be doing through our careers. If you could look back at all of your experiences of applications, of reviewing and all the rest of it, and think of one bit of advice you'd really like to give the people listening to this who are thinking, right, I'm ready to apply, I'm trying to apply, I'm going through this process. What would that be? What would be the main thing you'd like to stress to them?
Ultimately, when you're thinking about putting together a proposal, you have to start with the idea, and you have to start with what it is that you actually want to research, and then look for a funder to enable that to happen, and then go and sense check what you're doing and how you've done it with a whole bunch of people. If you follow those 3 steps, you are much more likely to succeed. And I think that is something that you can get very lost in the detail of the proposal and whether you've, dotted the I's and crossed the T's. But you do need to take that step back and just think, okay, is it all clear? Can I put what I want to do in a paragraph really clearly, and someone's going to think that's a good idea? Because if I can't do that, it's really unlikely you're going to get it through the the peer review process.
So have the idea, find the funder, and then get it sense checked and listen to what the research officers in particular are saying to you, because they have a lot of experience.
And they're fantastic at reading from a non-technical perspective, but they've read an awful lot of academic research, right? So your paragraph, honestly, you know, when I started, some of my paragraphs probably didn't really convey what it was that the research was trying to do. And, you know, you learn as you go the importance of being able to summarize and to put things in plain language away from the jargon. And what is it you're actually trying to do here? Why is it important?
Yeah, big fantastic. And Pavan, you had some time to think there.
Yeah, well, I think, so Anna's given the kind of really practical advice. I think I'll say something more affective, right? And I think what I found is that people tend to be really generous with their time and their energy. And I think it can feel weird asking for help, but I think it is important to let oneself be helped by people who are further along in their careers. And that might be within your department, might be, you know, people that you kind of tangentially know. Yeah. But I think the thing that has kind of characterized my career is just the generosity, the unreasonable generosity, really, of colleagues who are willing to help and willing to read and willing to give comments and feedback. Yeah. And I think often it can feel intimidating as an early career researcher, but it is important to put oneself in a position where you can be helped. And then, you know, pay it forward whenever you get an opportunity to. But
so despite our potentially natural introversion within academia,
I think so, yeah. I think it is important.
Ask people. Remember that if they ask you, you would probably help them.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
remember that.
Absolutely. And remember that at the end of it all, you're quite right, I think, about the generosity of people. And that generosity, of course, also looks like the thousands of pieces of peer review that funders across the UK rely on. And those peer review are generally provided, you know, with no remuneration, sometimes no recognition. And, you know, they're taking their time to kind of assess. And I think that sometimes helps when you get some a peer review that might be sharp. You can put yourself and say that, you know, there's a lot of time being given.
That is helpful, yeah. Basically, there's a whole bunch of people all trying to find and fund really good ideas with the money that's available. So everyone play their part, keep trying, keep asking for help and offer help when the opportunity comes up. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we'll wrap it up there for today. Thank you for listening to Confessions of an Early Career Researcher. I've been your host, Leonie Smith. This podcast was brought to you by the British Academy in collaboration with the Leverhulme Trust.